So I've drawn this little eye study, and I've drawn it with just 2 pencils. We've used the black and we've used the warm grey one from the Polychromos. They're the only 2 pencils that I've used. And I didn't put too many layers down in this beginner's tutorial. Unless you're drawing on a paper that's very, very smooth, it's likely that you will get some of the grain coming through the final drawing. The amount of grain that comes through will depend on the brand of paper that you use. This is Fabriano Artistico hot press paper, and you can see that quite a bit of the grain is showing through. There aren't many layers that are down here, and there's quite a bit of the grain coming through. Now, one way that we could get rid of this is to just carry on with the pencils. If I carry on with the black pencil that I've used in here, you can see how the grain will disappear, and that will just require me to continue layering those pencils, adding those light layers of pencils until the grain is filled in. Sometimes you might want to speed this process up a little bit. We can use pencils that are more opaque and put down a heavier coverage of pigment on the paper. So these are Caran d'Ache Pablo pencils. I've got a Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils, and I've even got a Derwent Lightfast pencil there. They're all opaque pencils, and they all put down a really thick coverage of pigment on the paper, and they're going to be great at filling in the last bits of grain that we can see on the paper quite quickly. So let me take the ash grey from the Pablo pencil, and that's because it's really quite similar to the warm grey one that we've already been using from the Polychromos. So I'm going to take the ash grey. I'm just going to use this pencil to start to take away some of that grain. So you can see as I use the Pablo pencil, I'm using it really quite lightly in the direction that the fur's going. I don't want to take away from the fur direction, taking it over the lighter areas, and you can already see that the grain is disappearing, and that's because it's a really thick, heavy, opaque pencil that's putting a really good coverage of the pigment down onto the paper. So I tend to use them on the Artistico, on the Fabriano Artistico. I tend to use these Pablo pencils right at the end on the upper layers. And if I need something with a heavier coverage than the Polychromos as I'm working up through the layers, I tend to use the Luminance. The Luminance work really well, helping to fill the grain in on those lower layers. And then I just keep the Pablos for the upper layers. And that way it doesn't get too heavy too quickly. The pigment doesn't get too heavy too quickly. Not pressing on hard, blending those layers down underneath. And you can see how it's just taking those last little bits of grain away. I can let the light colour pencil go over into the darker areas, but you can see how quite quickly the grain's gone in these lighter areas. So putting the light pressure down with the Polychromos, this would definitely take several layers. Now, of course, you could press on hard with the Polychromos, but personally, I'm not that keen on the results that I get when I press on hard. I like to put every layer down really lightly, and it just keeps that texture and softness to the fur that I'm trying to achieve. So I don't press on hard with the pencils. That's just my style. It just doesn't suit the way that I draw. Just using it to go round these lighter bits, and already you can see that this lighter bit, the grain's disappearing in all of these lighter bits. So that's the ash grey from the Pablo. Like I say, you could use the Luminance, you could use the Derwent Lightfast, anything that is a nice opaque pencil that puts down a thick, heavy coverage. Let's use the ash grey in the dark bits up here, and we're going to do the same again. So I'm going to let this ash grey work into the darker area too, just blending that pigment, and then back in with the dark Polychromos. And you can see how the graininess of that paper, that tooth, it just disappears, and it starts to disappear a lot faster. Let's Do the same round here again. Let's just work over it with that lighter colour. Blend that out a little bit. And I just want to go back in to top up the darker areas. And you can see that that grain disappears quite quickly. Much faster than if we were just using the polychromos pencils alone. Now you can add them at any stage throughout the drawing, at any stage of the layers. Personally, I like to keep the luminance pencils for the lower layers as I'm building the layers and working on the drawing, and then the Pablo pencils I like to keep for the last layers, those upper layers, when I just want to get rid of a last little bit of grain. That's just my preference. I like to use the pencils that way around. So there we go. Really hope that this has been helpful. Just shows you how you can speed up the process. Get that grain filled in just a little bit faster by mixing the brands of pencils and bringing other pencil brands into the drawing. So bring in the luminance, bring in the Pablo into the drawing to mix with those polychromos. So there we go. I'll leave it there. Hope you found this useful, and I'll see you next time.